Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us here on the Armed with Reason podcast brought to you by GVpedia. If you've been here before, you've heard us introduce ourselves 100 times, but we're going to do it again anyway. So I'm Caitlin, the executive director of GVpedia, and Devin, who is our founder, is here with us today.
It's me again.
It's Devin again, yes.
Hey guys.
So last month, the editor of our Armed with Reason Substack, whose name is Eric, wrote a piece about the evolution of toy guns, which was interesting for a variety of reasons, but especially given the holiday season and toys, we thought that it was particularly time appropriate. And it actually ended up being one of our most viewed articles of 2023. So we wanted to bring Eric on the podcast this week to give us some insight into what he learned while he was researching the piece. So welcome, Eric. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Hello, thanks for having me. I
And
should clarify technically it was about the advertising of toy guns over the years and then how I felt like it changed, but we'll get into
yes, yes.
that.
Thank you for clarifying that.
Because
Yeah.
I'm no expert on toy guns. But anyway.
So, Eric, tell us what inspired you to research and write about the history of toy guns and the advertisements that attempted to sell them.
So around Christmas, I think Shannon and I, my girlfriend, who also works for GVpedia, we were just talking about catalogs and how fun it was always to get, like when we were kids and you still got paper catalogs in the mail. It was fun they came around every, October or whatever, and it was always fun to get them and circle what toys you wanted and how nobody has catalogs sent to them anymore. It was like one of these conversations. And then it just got me thinking about picking out toys and circling things in a catalog ostensibly to give to my mom, who I guess Santa shops at Sears. I don't know how that worked or how I figured that out when I was a kid. But but and I remember thinking back that I never really played with toy guns much. And but they were around, all my friends had them, and I kind of got me wondering why they were never like a big deal for me. And then I just thought, as we're always looking for good original content here at Armed with Reason, I thought, oh, Christmas is coming, and we should maybe do something like that. And I know people like shopping tips and things, and I just thought it was our version of a kind of a story like that. So I just got thinking about it, and I also really I tend to like old stuff, old TV shows, old movies, and it's fun to jump down rabbit holes on YouTube of old TV commercials. So I thought, in a very non-academic way, just look at the way that toy guns have been marketed via kids' television toy commercials through the years. And I really completely unscientifically zoomed through YouTube for a few days and just picked out what I thought were representative commercials that sort of told a bit of a story. And that's how I did. So that's how I came.
Cool. So while you're doing this research, like what did you see as the biggest link between various types of toy guns being seen as in at the time, and then also any toy guns being seen as inappropriate?
Yeah. So just to, this is probably more from the previous question, but I know as a kid, I always loved squirt guns. I thought they were hilarious. I think anybody, you can squirt water in someone's face. It's funny. So I
Right.
always liked that as a kid. And I remembered, um, well, anyway, to get to your question, I can get back to that, how I feel like I developed this aversion towards toy guns. But to answer your question, um, basically, I noticed that post-war, when most of these commercials would have started, television commercials for toy guns, it's pretty much post-war. There was a little bit of military because we were coming out of the war, so there's a lot of GI Joe toys and stuff, but those are more action figures and things, and maybe like toy Jeeps and stuff. But the toy guns really came in with it seemed like, with the really huge popularity for a long time of Westerns in movies and on TV. A lot of people forget that Gunsmoke, I think up until Simpsons, was maybe the longest running television show on TV. But none of these shows are ever on, hardly even in syndication, even when I was a kid anymore. But those toys seem to mimic the big popularity of Westerns. And you know, that you only see a little bit of the, I did notice I only saw a little bit of the cowboys and Indians, as it were. You know, there, some of those commercials didn't really show a lot of shooting at bad guy Indians, you know, which would is a whole other topic we could talk about another time as far
Yeah,
as race
absolutely.
and everything else. I was a little surprised there wasn't too much of that. That said, this is YouTube. There are only so many commercials that got saved over the years and were, you know, uploaded to YouTube. So who knows? There's probably thousands of more commercials in the ether somewhere. But so I noticed that popularity of cowboy stuff, and then you can tell like it literally goes along with like, oh, and then like gangster movies by like the latter 50s and early 60s and shoot 'em ups like Al Capone or whatever. So you start seeing little toy commercials with guys with fedoras and black coats and like film noir or something, you know. Doubt they called it film noir in a toy commercial in 1960, but in any event. And then you see like, oh, okay, then you're getting into the 60s and it's like, oh, spy movies, James Bond. You see these kind of, now the kids have silencers on their guns and stuff like that. So they're that, I kind of saw that it seemed like and even all the way up to say the Star Wars toys, which again were mostly action figures and stuff, but they had Han Solo's um, laser gun, you know, which they called. We were talking about this last night too. They didn't call them guns exactly; they called them something else. You know,
Blasters.
blasters. Thank you, blasters. And which I wonder about that too. I wonder if that was part of the marketing, right? But in any event, besides being in the movie, so you saw they were all based on sort of fictional Hollywood or just sort of fun kid trends, and then it seems like when you get into the sort of early 70s, and this is where, you know, I was born in 67, so I see, my memories are my mom being a little skeptical of toy guns, and like westerns weren't as popular anymore, and on, I think, a parental level, the movies started getting more violent, more realistically violent, and it was taken more seriously. When people were shot in movies, you saw the bleeding, you saw the holes, you know, Bonnie and Clyde, all that, and the Godfather movies. And I think parents, and then the whole just hippie movement stuff of the late 60s that were like, guns are bad, killing people is bad, you know, Western heroes aren't always good, you know, and that stuff started passing. And so by the time I was a little kid asking for guns, if I did, um, well, anyway, to finish your story. So then I noticed after the Star Wars era, when toys were kind of back in for a second, toy guns, because of this kind of science fiction movie trend. Then by the time you got into the Reagan years, the toy commercials became more militaristic again. And they weren't necessarily tied to a trend of the time. Well, besides Reagan and I guess the Cold War, the end of the Cold War. They weren't as tied to like James Bond or cowboys. They were just like military, and the toys became a little more technical and a little more sort of complex, you know. And then by the time you get to the really popular super soakers, like the giant water guns that, you know, you have to, you know, pump and all that, those commercials are almost exclusively like kids running around and like hiding behind trees and like making notes with each other about where to attack and all that. It's completely divorced from any sort of movie or TV show, and it's just about, again, unscientific, but it's just about this sort of tactical, you know, shooting. And I thought that was actually kind of how the NRA's promotion had gone over the years. When you think about it, it went from hunting and cowboy stuff with dad in the 50s all the way through to a response to the hippie parenting, which was, in a way, which was make guns, you know, more realistic and make them more a part of everyday life. And so I guess I saw a trend like that. And yeah, and I was also a little bit surprised in the early days of guns how many real toy bullets came out of these things, because the whole concept of swallowing them as kids, by the 70s they got rid of all that. You know, they just like, you can't have guns that shoot toys, you know, bullets that are this big so kids can chew on them and choke, you know. So I was kind of shocked by how sort of technical some of those 50s guns were actually. But most of them were shoot 'em up cowboy things that you put in your holsters and that kind of thing. By the 90s, much more technical. And I also wanted to point out that like I did not get into video games at all, and I didn't get into BB guns because I consider BB guns a kind of real gun, and video games is a whole other story for a whole other time. So that's my long-winded answer. I rarely give a short-winded answer.
So before we started this podcast, Devin and I were reminiscing a little bit about our childhood and how toy guns came into play depending on what we were doing. So I brought up super soakers and what we called water pistols, right? Like you'd get a pack of 3 or 5 at the grocery store or at Toys R Us, and we used to bring them to field day at
Mhm.
school. So it
Yeah.
was totally appropriate to,
Yes.
you know, like you said, hide behind bushes or trees or the slide and like ambush somebody all at the
Yeah.
same time,
Yeah.
right? Like this was the 90s and there was nothing wrong with that. And I remember Halloween parades in elementary school and kids would have cap guns. I think they were told like don't fire them, like they didn't want to hear like the loud popping, but you
Right.
still had this fabricated weapon that in some ways really did look pretty realistic.
Yeah, I should say that too, that like the cap guns are a sort of bizarre subset of toy guns, but because they literally have gunpowder, right? It's essentially
Right.
that's a kind of carbon or something. And and I didn't go into that too much because one, there were not very many TV commercials that I could yank off of YouTube about cap guns. There's some from the 50s, and some of those are in the article. Um, I didn't go off on that too much because it's almost like, again, in a weird way, it's almost more realistic or something, but mainly because for this particular article, there just were not a ton of commercials about cap guns. But certainly when I was a kid, cap guns were still very popular. I'm pretty sure they still sell cap guns. I don't know, but maybe, I don't know, at like
Yeah,
vintage
I
toy
don't
shops.
it's been a long time since I perused this toy gun aisle. We could probably go on Amazon actually right now
I'm
and
sure you
see
could.
what's on there.
Yeah, yeah.
And Devin, you were talking about like a Western costume that you had at one point.
Yeah, so which would definitely not fly today. But
Right.
as a 90s kid, there's like an 89ers day at our school, and I don't know if you remember the Maverick series,
Mhm.
but I was going to be Brett Maverick, and so I had like the vest, deck of cards sort of thing, cowboy hat, and a holster, and I wanted to bring one of my cap revolvers. And my parents were like, "Yeah, that's not a good idea." And at the time, I was like, "But why?"
Yeah, yeah.
And now it's like, "Oh, that makes a lot more sense." But
I was
it was
wondering about that
still,
with you, Devin, because where you grew up compared to where I grew up, the fact that you just said we had an 89ers day is just, that wasn't a phrase that ever came up in Cleveland, Ohio. Just so growing up in Cleveland was definitely, even when I moved to Columbus to go to school, that was 2 hours below Cleveland, but it may as well have been another state because Cleveland is just that area. I never knew anybody who went hunting. I never knew anybody who had a gun. I think one of my friend's dad had a pistol somewhere in his house. I never saw it. It wasn't something that I grew up with. So when I think back to, I'm sorry to interrupt it, but I just want to think back. One of the main impetuses that made me think about this article too was I wondered how my my mom was really good at. This is an old joke we used to make. We used to call it the Playboy theory. If you found a Playboy, if your parents went, that is horrible, that is terrible, you should never look at that, it's dirty, it's awful, and they throw it away violently, you of course wanted to see what the hell this Playboy was, right? Because that made it exciting. If your parents said, you don't want to see that, it's just junk, and you'd be like, oh, okay. My mom kind of did that with toy guns. Like if I did actually say, well, my friends all want to get this one toy gun, she, instead of saying, they're the worst, they're horrible, like you can't, you're never going to have a gun in this house. She just kind of said like, well, what do you want that for? I mean, I could probably get you that toy for the same amount, or, because we were always broke, or, it just wasn't, she did it very calmly and like, and so I never really wanted a toy gun. I think I did get a Han Solo one at one time, but I think that got me thinking about how we work, sort of a connection to how we work in GBpedia these days about if you just beat somebody over the head with like, I think all guns should be off the face of the earth right now, sure, that'd be great. But you kind of want to go in with a more approachable, realistic talk, conversational thing like that, Anyway, so I got thinking about that too. Anyway.
yeah. I also like growing up in semi-rural Oklahoma. Like my parents had a rifle and a shotgun out on the farm because they were necessities. They weren't for self-defense, but to keep the wild dogs and other critters away from horse pens. But I was not allowed near those, which was a very good idea. But I had toy guns galore. I had toy soldiers. I remember like I got this gift of like a $20 like Toys R Us bond or something. And my big spend with that was for this Nerf gun sniper rifle, effective range of 20 feet. Um, or
Oh my
something.
goodness.
um, yeah, so like it was just part of life and didn't really come up, but that was before the mass shooting era.
Yeah.
Right.
And that basically started with Columbine to a degree.
Yeah, I mean, so by then I wasn't buying toys anymore. Although, who am I kidding? I still buy toys like this punk nutcracker that I have. But anyway, I still buy toys. But I remember when I got down to Columbus, and then I met some more people who were like, oh yeah, we had guns. I dated a girl who I went to visit her family in Ashtabula, Ohio, which is really only about 40 minutes away from where I grew up. And there were definitely people, it was a little more farmy. Definitely people had guns up there. So I'm not going to say that all of Northeast Ohio had no guns, because of course they did, but it's just not something that I ever even really had to think about. And then yeah, by the time of Columbine and all that in the '90s, not unlike when I was doing this story and seeing some of these toy commercials, thinking like just how they're packaged to kids and what sort of pop cultural milieu, is around them that make them sort of acceptable. And for some reason, it felt like James Bond movies, that's acceptable, but not running around with 8 other friends pumping guns like this and shooting isn't. I don't know. I also didn't get into too much of the laser tag thing, which kind of took toy guns into an enclosed space, right? And in its own way, it's sort of an oddly realistic uh, game to get involved in. But I did throw a couple of those commercials in there. So anyway.
So while you two were chatting, I decided I have Amazon at my fingertips, so let me look up cap guns and toy guns. And there are quite a few to choose from. Ironically, many are labeled ages 8 and up, or in the title, they have safe for kids.
Yeah.
And some are actually inspired by guns that are manufactured here in the United States. They have the manufacturer names in the title.
Wow. Wow.
But I am here recording in Connecticut, and we have, I think, we were just ranked with the 3rd strongest gun laws in the country. And every one that I've clicked on, with the exception of the Nerf guns, has this disclaimer in red letters that says, this item cannot be shipped to your selected delivery location. Please choose a different location.
Wow. Wow.
So I feel very naive that I didn't, maybe I need to read up on laws and
That
toy
is very
guns in the
strange.
state of Connecticut, because
Hmm.
clearly it's not something that I'm allowed to purchase here, I
Half
guess.
guns. That's wild. Wow.
And maybe it's
Still
just
get those little
because
things, those in a box that you throw on the ground and they explode. I wonder if you can still get those things.
poppers.
Yeah, whatever they're called.
Yeah. So I don't know. It's sort of weird. Like some of these more like Halloween-y looking ones. Halloween-y is not a word.
Yeah,
Apparently,
yeah,
I just
yeah,
made it
yeah.
one. Um, so ones for dress up seem to be okay, but the ones that I guess have the real caps, or I don't know exactly what the parameters are, but that's something really interesting and to look up.
Well, remember when they used to, wasn't there like a rule that like toy guns had to have a little red, like red
Yeah,
ink or
red or
knob
orange. Yeah,
or
Yeah.
orange? Yeah, yeah. I wonder if that's
yeah.
even a rule. I feel like not for the squirt guns or Nerf guns, I don't think, because I guess they just consider them so utterly safe and that they don't have to, and they look so wild. I did notice that about the Nerf and the squirt gun, the giant soakers, is they sort of look ridiculous. They're pink and orange and green and striped, and they clearly don't look anything. I mean, sort of like in their sort of tactical on your arm kind of thing, but they don't really look anything like real guns compared to the old little handguns and stuff. So I don't know, maybe that was a way to get around some of those rules or whatever, or to feel better about still making guns but make them look so ridiculous that but I did want to say that a number of people, which was kind of creepy, when I did sort of try to share this on social media and stuff, a number of people said stuff like, oh well, I have friends whose parents just flat out buy them guns for Christmas now, like real guns.
Like real
It's
guns.
not even a
Gone are the days
question
where
of,
you buy toy guns. Now we just buy
the
real
whole
guns.
worry of like, should I get him a toy gun is just out the window. And then I also wanted, that was creepy, but I also noticed that people had, and I knew they were going to mention this. I even asked you guys about this, but the lead image of the article, I just thought made sense for the article because it's a guy holding a 22 caliber rifle, a little kid, very 50s, happy holding his Christmas gift, and there's like a Christmas tree behind him. And I thought, okay, this works for the article, but I knew it wasn't an ad for a toy gun. So of course people had to point out like, oh, that's not actually a toy gun. I had one of those. I'm like, okay, I just used it because it looked kind of good as a lead, but I get it. It's not a toy gun. So I just wanted to point that out to anybody who jumps in and says, you don't know what you're talking about with guns. That's a real gun. Okay. Image for a
Well,
phone.
and one of the kind of interesting things that's beyond the article, but you mentioning that reminded me when I was in Kentucky at Bud's Gun Shop was almost the toyification of real guns. Like you had these brightly colored Glocks that are like pink or purple, and like if you hold one, they feel light, and it's like this feels like a toy. It almost looks like a toy in a way too.
Yeah.
And then when firing an AR-15 equivalent, like it just struck me how light and plastic it felt. It was like, this feels like a toy.
Yeah.
And like, I don't know if others have had that similar experience where it's like, wow, this just feels toy-like. It might just be me, but I was kind of surprised with particularly the more modern polymer-based guns that toy feel. Whereas if you have something like a Colt 1911, like there's no mistaking it. That thing's hefty.
Yeah. Do you think
That's a real gun sort of thing.
do you think it's something to do with, and you're talking to a barely a novice here, but was there not a kind of a sense of trying to sell more guns, you make them a little less scary, right? And you make pink ones for the ladies for their purse, and that kind of thing. I mean, maybe that's part of it too, that you're not buying some, 70-pound, surface to air missile or something, trying to make it more, approachable somehow and figure out a way to make them lighter. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely been a element, like, and this is with military guns as well, to make them lighter so you're able to carry more ammunition on the battlefield, stuff like
Right.
that. So lightweight and durable. But there's definitely a trend in the like real gun marketing, it seems, and the production of these guns to like try to make them less serious.
Mm-hmm.
In a way, it's like, oh yeah, here's your purple, pink, or light blue handgun that almost in a way mirrors the sort of Nerf colors,
Yeah.
where there's kind of getting to be this almost sliding scale of where one of the reasons Nerf has bright colors is so nobody's going to mistake it for a real gun,
Right.
which is, I imagine, one of the reasons why the old cap guns and such have fallen out of favor is because, like, aside from the orange tip, like they do look quite real.
And it's it's
occasion.
another sad comment that, Caitlin, I'm sure, you have a child. I'm sure it's not so fun anymore out on the playground to hear cap, cap, cap little noises, even if they're, and that was something that, I joked about the little poppers, but I can guess that there's probably school grounds where teachers would, send the kid home if he was throwing those
Oh
around.
yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I mean, anything that looks like a gun, sounds like a gun, kids even running around making gun shapes with their hands will get in trouble.
Yeah.
We've been to Legoland a couple of times, and they have these giant tubs of Legos, different sizes and colors, and it's supposed to spur on creativity. And so the kids will sit there and put together, we were there near the holidays. So my daughter was building a Christmas tree, right? And someone had a toy car, but then there's an overwhelming number of kids are running around with swords or guns that they've made out of these Legos.
Wow.
And they're they're hiding, right? So again, they're playing that sort of like gang up and ambush sort of style. But it is to see, I mean, some of these kids are like 4 and 5. And I try to think back to when I was that age, and granted, I was the oldest child, so I didn't have older siblings to influence what I was watching on TV.
Yeah.
But I don't know if I would have had any idea how to build a faux gun out of Legos when I was 5 years
Oh,
old.
I
Well,
definitely would
yeah, you would have, yeah, yeah.
have.
Well, and then there's a
Like,
weird, there's a weird,
my preferred instrument of that were connects, and like
Oh yeah,
making pretend guns, pretend swords, seeing how long you can get the sword before it kind of flops over on under its own weight. But oh
well,
yeah,
there's a weird connection there with like laser printing and stuff now. Like there are these
right. The 3D
odd,
printed guns.
yeah, there's odd sort of commingling of maybe someone could just design one for fun. You know what I mean? And so is that a
Right.
toy or is it a workable machine? And this actually got me thinking about when you said such young kids, why are they even thinking about, death? But which is the way I always looked at it. But and I wondered, which maybe this is another article I can do, but I recently saw the new Godzilla movie, which was surprisingly good. And not just that, but memories and reading history of World War II. It does make you wonder how and if toy guns were marketed in, or this kind of idea of warring and soldiers and everything was marketed in Japan after the war, or if it was at all. If toy guns were popular, I'm guessing they
Interesting.
probably were. And that is a similar, I think Germany and Japan had, oddly enough, similar cultures to America as far as guns and how they look at that kind of stuff. So it would be interesting to look into that and see. I don't know how much of that I'm going to find on YouTube, but that maybe is another idea. But yeah, it was sad to and interesting to think about those kind. I mean, this is a whole other topic, but our heroes were often people who fought and had guns and such, right? Or what we were taught were our heroes, right? So, and you definitely saw that in the 50s commercials for sure. Um, it was really interesting to see there were hardly any from the 70s. Peace and love, I guess, in the 70s. Disco dancing, probably a lot of disco dancing toys in the 70s. I don't know. But,
Right.
Saturday Night Fever toys or something. But there was hardly any. And then the 80s really ramped up, and that fit perfectly with Reagan and all that, which I have a memory of. I'm a little older than you guys. And the world definitely got more militaristic, more scare tactics about the Cold War, all of that. Rambo was a big one. It's a very, very popular movie, a classic R-rated movie that kids all snuck into. So there's a bit of that in the article too, some commercials like that. So sorry, I went off there.
The advertising may have been linked to, I mean, post World War II, the generation that we deemed the greatest generation, right? These young men came home from war and we had parades and we cheered for them.
Mhm.
And Vietnam was received in a completely different way,
Oh, I
right?
should have mentioned that. Sure, of
Right.
course.
So like sending our troops over and then them coming home, the way we treated them after them, still treat them today, those who are still with us, very different stories, endings to those wars. So I
That's
wonder,
another thing I got from my mom was her reminding me of how, I mean, we all know this kind of stuff, I guess now, but it was a bit of an eye opener when I was a kid that I generally have a few memories in my head of some of those news stories where I'm sorry, no matter if I turn it off or not, my text still ping on my computer. Um, no matter, I remember seeing some of those news stories of coffins being taken off of military planes in America, and my mom being sort of shocked, and she's like, "We certainly did not see that, even during the Korean War or whatever." And those scenes of people getting shot and over there in the battlefield and all that really did, it spooked people a lot more, and I think, yeah, Vietnam definitely, I'm sure, made toy guns not as popular, by the, say, whatever, early to mid 70s.
right?
There were a lot of reasons, a lot of cultural reasons, and also, again, not an expert, but sometimes some of the really nice toy guns were a little expensive, and there was other reasons like that maybe people just didn't buy them as much. But anyway,
We have, one of our most revered holiday movies of recent generations is based on the Red Ryder BB gun, right?
that's
Like
right. That's
it's
right.
2-hour Christmas movie is about how can this kid scheme, to get his parents or to get Santa to leave.
Oh, and then I saw one of the
God.
actors in The Deer Hunter. Have you ever seen The Deer Hunter?
Oh
That's a
yes,
real
yeah,
uplifting movie. And
that's a
one of the
great.
actors that was in The Deer Hunter, which a quick synopsis, if you haven't seen it out there in the virtual world, it's a Vietnam era movie. It's really great. You should see it. It is completely sad. And there is a very infamous Russian roulette scene. And one of the actors that was in that movie had this hilarious thing on TMZ that he considers it a Christmas movie because I haven't seen it in a while, but part of it takes place during the Christmas season. Also, most of it filmed in Cleveland, Ohio. But anyway, and it was took part in the Christmas season. So he's trying to hype it as you should watch this every year for Christmas. Don't watch The Deer Hunter if you want to get in a Christmas movie.
No, don't watch it at all. If you're
I mean,
highly
it's great acting. It's
sensitive,
some of the best acting you could ever see. But
if you're what in the mental health world we call a highly sensitive person, don't watch it at all. Don't
no,
read the synopsis online. Don't go to Rotten Tomatoes. Like, just
it's
don't watch it.
it is rough.
Disclaimer: a lot. No, it's something. The only reason I watched it, it was an assignment in a class that I took, a history
Yeah.
class on the Vietnam War. And
Well, I was finding it interesting because you mentioned A Christmas Story, also filmed in Cleveland, probably about 4 years after Deer Hunter was filmed. So I don't know
wow.
if Cleveland got picked to be the weird Christmas town, but anyway.
Maybe you had good tax write-offs for directors and movie
Probably,
makers.
yeah.
So, just quickly, what would you say surprised you most about what you learned in the research that you were doing?
So kind of talked about it before, the way that it seems obvious, but the way that it was, the guns and the toys were so tied to sort of ostensibly harmless pop cultural things like TV shows and movies, rather than more tactical ideas of the 80s and 90s and the sort of warlike, verbiage and stuff that was used in the 90s commercials compared to the sort of fun kid in his cowboy outfit 1950s commercials. The guns that actually shot bullets, I was pretty shocked by that. And a lot of them, I mean, this is pop cultural film guy stuff, but how these commercials tried to mimic the movies and TV shows that they were coming from, I found very fun and interesting. If not exactly surprising, but I thought it was neat how, if they were talking about a James Bond type silencer gun, the scene tried to look like a little detective movie or spy movie. So that wasn't wildly surprising, but it was neat to see. Kind of made me wonder how many young directors might have got their start in TV commercials, but probably a lot. Also, it's fun to watch because like Kurt Russell, who was in the new not very good Monarch Godzilla TV show, he was in a couple of these toy gun commercials. It was one of the first jobs he got. So this is a whole other topic, but the shrinking of time, you can see actors that still work today pop up in some of these commercials from 50 years ago, So
Right.
That was kind of fun. But the most surprising for me, or I guess educational, was just seeing how it really mimicked wider pop cultural trends, and it wasn't pop culture anymore by the 80s. It was, oh my God, the Russians are going to come get us again. It was Rambo and it was Reagan, and it was like more sort of serious, which again mimicked where the NRA was going. I'm making a very loose analogy here, but where the NRA was going with its selling of guns, and where the religious right was going with evangelicals, which is a whole other story for another thing. But that's sort of weird culture war stuff.
Just to tie in, as a mom, when I was putting together the intro and the questions for this podcast, I was curious how many children have been injured with toy guns. And I didn't do a deep dive into what those injuries look like specifically. Although when I Googled it, a lot of eye injuries seem to
Sure,
come
you're
up
going to shoot your eye out, kids.
as individual stories, right? You'll shoot your eye out.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
literally these are concerns, valid concerns.
Yeah.
But there was an article in Newsweek that showed from 1990 to 2016, over 360,000 children had been injured with non-powder firearms. So that's an average of almost 14,000 children a year. So anything from bruises, which I don't know, like if you jack up your Nerf gun, if you can like increase the PSI, or airsoft guns. I knew kids who played with those in college. the eyeball ruptures, choking, all those sorts of things. So just as a mom, it felt I couldn't talk about toy guns without thinking about like the injuries that were created
Yeah, I
from
mean,
them.
the ones that I would think of off the bat, just when I was a kid, totally anecdotal, were usually the choking things. Most parents, BB guns were definitely something that most of my friends and the parents raising them did not want to have BB guns around because, kids would always say, "Oh, I'll just, shoot at mice in the backyard or something," but
Right.
they'd end up shooting each other, right? And so that's clearly you definitely get injured by that. But usually it was choking implements. People were a little more worried about kids just swallowing. This is a fun side note, but since I believe Devin is a Star Wars fan, when the original Boba Fett toy came out, a little Boba Fett action figure, he had a missile on his back, and you could press the button, and the missile would shoot out, right? But you could only get this through the mail. You had to cut out the little things in the back of the toys and send them in the mail, and then you got it back. And my friend across the street got one of these. They only made like 1,000 of them or something. And then the company stopped making them because kids were swallowing them and choking on them. And my friend threw his out. And I said, "Why did you
Oh
throw that out?"
no.
And this is how much I guess the parents that I grew up with were really serious. He said, "Well, my mom said I might choke on it." I'm like, "So don't eat it. Don't eat it. Eat it. It's already worth like $500." I was so mad at that kid. But he listened to his mom. So,
Hey, can't fault a kid for listening to their mother.
can't fault the kid for that.
And I would be interested on how many of those injuries are from like airsoft or stuff like paintball, because
Yeah.
I mean, like if you get shot with a paintball gun, which I have, like you're gonna get a bruise,
Yeah.
sort
Right.
of thing. And almost the same thing with the airsoft, like there's going to be kind of a welt on it. So like I would think slash hope for that article that they excluded the ones that are like in the normal course of going into an airsoft course and
Yeah.
getting whacked with some pellets. Um, but it's still kind of harrowing. And there's definitely like the massive concern with eye injuries, because like if it hits the eye or face area, like with airsoft and paintball, they can do serious damage.
Sure. Yeah.
And it is kind of part of the like kind of spectrum in a way of like from real gun to toy gun, and then you have like the airsoft and paintball sort of thing in between.
Yeah.
And where like that they actually do injure people, like they're light injuries, but like when you've been whacked by one.
Yeah.
And I like while it was outside the scope of the article, like I think that's been another trend in the probably 90s to 2000s up to present, where you have more of that sort of militarized aspect, because like with the airsoft, it does look like a real gun
Yeah.
at first
Yeah, I
glance.
did want to mention that when the previous question about surprising was, and it's one of the last commercials in that article, is there's a gun that has 3 settings. One is just shoots one bullet, and these things are about that long, right? I think it's a Nerf thing. I think it's a Nerf thing. So they're soft, but probably has a plastic end just to make it fly. But and then there was a second setting where it would shoot 3 blasts, and then there was a third setting where unending shots or whatever, right?
Your
I thought, what a
machine gun,
weird,
Nerf gun,
yeah,
essentially.
I thought, what a weird,
Right.
like it was such a direct corollary to some real guns. And I know that commercial was probably, I think, from like, say, early 2000s. And I'm kind of guessing that after all these school shootings, because literally the commercial is kids going around a building, right? Like running with these
Mhm.
things and setting their setting. I'm like, pretty sure maybe those commercials aren't around anymore. Or at least they shouldn't be. But that was kind of creepy and surprising, that something that so close to the way a real gun like that would be designed.
So head and neck were the most common injured body parts in these 360,000 injuries. The average age of the injured child was 12 years old. And boys accounted for almost what percent do you think of injuries?
Of 99.
It's got to be 90.
90%. Good job,
Uh,
Devin. 90%.
Yeah.
So yes, while I was playing with tea sets and dollies, the boys were running around shooting themselves in the eyes, apparently. So anyway,
Yeah, they must be aiming at heads, I guess. That's sort of a
yeah,
starts.
whether it's unintentional
Sure.
or not, right? But certainly goes back to A Christmas Story.
Or
So
maybe they follow all those dumb scenes in movies when the guy runs out of bullets and then he goes like this and throws his
yeah.
gun. Maybe they
No,
were doing that.
no, that's true. That's absolutely true.
I hate
And
those
I
scenes.
know grown-ups who have hit themselves in the face trying to take a cork out of a champagne bottle. So,
Yeah.
Quick, look up those
Well,
stats.
oh
That's a
boy,
stat I want to see.
right.
one kind of note that as we're towards wrapping up is
Yeah.
like, and while I don't have the data for like Europe and elsewhere, like kids and particularly boys across the world like to play war
Mhm.
type stuff. And so they'll have the toy guns and toy swords and stuff. But there's a reason why we don't have an epidemic of sword violence. There's a reason why most other advanced countries don't have an epidemic of gun violence.
Yeah.
Like with the swords, like oftentimes they're strictly regulated or to where like they're just not as lethal as firearms.
Mhm.
And so I just wanted to kind of put that out there that like playing war like is often debatable among parents on whether you want your kid to do that.
Yeah.
But kind of like violent video games, there's no real correlation between kids playing war and growing up and actually shooting
Yeah.
to a degree. But there is a definite correlation between allowing easy access to lethal guns and these shootings that are at epidemic levels.
And I know we're wrapping up, but just as an anecdotal, I was in a band, New Bomb Turks, if anyone wants to look them up. We toured in Europe a lot, and we would get in these gun discussions sometimes because you'd go over to Europe and you're from America and they just assume you have tons of guns and cowboy movies are your favorites and everything. And I recognize I have a couple of memories of talking with people about how like toy guns weren't always a thing because real guns just kind of weren't around. So there's some people, again, anecdotal, but some people's idea of guns was more from like cool old crime movies, A Godfather or something like that. One scene where like a guy pulled out a gun, and almost more in that very European sort of, beautiful existential old, 40s movie or something. Whereas I think there is a notion in America for sure that like you could see that some parents think of toy guns as a kind of preparation for when the kid's going to have to own a real gun, and that's a whole other again story for another day. But I think there's a little feeling of that some of these guns are like, well, because the assumption is the kid's probably going to get a real gun someday, and you can't buy a 4-year-old a gun, at least in most states. Hell, get him a toy one and he can start aiming at squirrels in the backyard. So, I mean, there's part of that too, not that there isn't hunting in other countries, but, anyway.
Well, we appreciate you taking the time to research and write the article in the first place. Again, like I said, when I opened, it was one of our most viewed articles of 2023. But to come here and discuss this with us, to allow us to reminisce a little bit, but to also punctuate what gun culture is like in the United States, right? It starts from childhood and advertising is a way that for many years we have looped children into falling in love with certain toys, and toy guns certainly are not any different. So, quickly before we go, Eric, I just wanted to give you a chance to give a pitch for why our listeners should sign up for our Armed with Reason Substack.
Sure. Well, to put a point on what you just said too, there was a time when there were actual toy cigarette commercials, and there aren't those anymore. So to use that hopeful corollary that we always try to use in the gun violence prevention movement, that we'll work at guns like we worked at cigarettes. There are less toy gun TV commercials these days, I think. Armed with Reason, every day we try to put original, new or repurposed original articles every day at Armed with Reason. For me, I thought it was a way when Devin approached me about editing it. GVpedia itself is very, very info. statistics based, which is great, and we need that. And I think our Substack is a way to be a little more bloggy and sort of try to have some personal stories or more extended articles about a lot of myth busting, a lot of gun lobby myths that we would like to bust, and we put a lot of articles like that up. And again, yeah, we're trying to get more interviews, podcasts like this, just to give them sort of a more, I don't want to say necessarily always personal, but just a more relatable, pull it together, kind of pull all the numbers together, stories to get on the site, to get people to rethink things and about our weird, obsessed gun culture in America. And I'm really proud to do it. I like getting up every day and working on the site, and it, as much as it can be dour and get people down sometimes, a lot of the stories and a lot of the information that you guys compile for us mostly, and gun violence archives, really gives us perspective and gives us some hope that people will see these hard numbers and personal stories and try to vote in people who support legislation, good legislation. So that was, again, long-winded. I told you, I warned you.
You
I'm
did
not
great.
for sound bites.
No, you did great. So I'm going to wrap us up for today's episode. Devin and I, if you are listening and you would like to give us some topic ideas, Devin and I are going to be on for next week's podcast. And we're always interested in what our listeners might want to learn more about. So feel free to get in touch with us, and we will check in with everybody soon. Thanks again for listening.
Thank you very much. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Was that all right?